Hello, it's Ben Nicholson, the lead author of Clockwork Basilisk, with my friend and colleague and co-writer John McLean here in Australia. We're going to look at the companion volume to Clockwork Basilisk, which is called Who Invented the Wheel Gun? Who Invented the Wheel Gun has 5 documents in it, which includes a new appraisal by Jonathan Ferguson of the invention of the revolver in its 300-year history prior to Collier. It has a couple of fascinating articles that was in Dickens's household words about the London factory of Colt, and then it has another essay about the Colt factory in Hertford. And what I'd like to focus on today is the lecture that Colt gave at ICE, the Institution of Civil Engineers, and a fascinating discussion after the lecture that includes Robert Adams, the English revolver maker. John, how do you valorize the differences between the manufacture of the Colt pistol and the Adams pistol?
Well, I think Colt, his main complication was having a separate barrel to frame. Otherwise, I think his manufacturing was much more mechanised than Adams.
Would you like to make the disassembly?
Well, it's all about the machinery used. The difficulty with the Colt was getting the... There we go, everything's falling apart. But is actually getting the slot for the wedge correctly positioned for a tapered wedge to seat the barrel firmly in the frame. Whereas Adams didn't have that problem.
And why not?
With the one-piece frame.
Could you take apart the cylinder?
But of course he'd have to do an equal amount of machining to put the mechanism in.
The barrel and the frame is one piece of metal.
One forging, yes.
One forging, whereas Colt has two, and the addition of a loading lever.
Which is just an accessory. It's just hinged and fitted. There's no different to having that removable arbor there. Whereas Colt's arbor's fixed.
Whereas the Adams has finger pressed bullets that are held in place by a felt pad, like that. So there was no need for a loading lever.
No, and they can be pushed in with the cylinder in the frame because there's a relief in the frame here to push them in.
Yep.
But they are not double. If you were travelling, I think you would need to check them to ensure your bullets wouldn't vibrate out or slowly work out.
And what about the quality of the machining and the quality of assembly? The wood stock, for example.
I think the Adams shows a lot more hand fitting in different parts, depending on how you pull them apart. But whereas Colt was mainly machined by machinery, like precision machinery, without the hand fitting. But of course, his final fitting could have involved hand fitting of the trigger and the actual cocking mechanism.
I mean, just looking at the number of steps needed to make the trigger, the Colt is really quite straightforward compared to the voluptuousness of the Adams.
But in parts, I think the Adams breaks down into a very simple amount of parts, possibly simpler even than the Colt once they're out of the frame.
And the British Army adopted the Adams?
No, the British Army adopted the Colt for the Crimean War. They trialled the Adams, but didn't really take on an Adams until it was developed into a double and single action mechanism, which became the Beaumont Adams. So we sort of wandered out of this era.
So here we have double action only, and no spur.
Just single action.
Yes, single action. And it was preferred because there would be less trigger weight and you'd be able to get a more accurate shot, apparently.
Well, they're only handguns for last resort use. I mean, most military wouldn't be relying on revolvers. Mounted men maybe occasionally, but this was early days. I think it took till through the 50s, the Crimean War and a few other conflicts before anyone decided which was the better revolver to be armed with. Again, it's a secondary arm.
Thanks, John.